Welcome back, guys. This week I'm going to be doing this buffet. I was perusing Facebook Marketplace and saw a listing for this buffet and absolutely fell in love with the shapes and lines and hardware on this piece of furniture. It has all of those charming vintage qualities to it. The solid wood, the really pretty veneer over top, the really nice craftsmanship, and I knew that it would be an amazing transformation piece. The top has a pretty significant stain, and it is missing a big chunk of veneer on the side. But besides that, it's in pretty good condition. There are some areas of the veneer that are pulling away where the glue let go. But besides that, it does have 3 good sized drawers, as well as 2 cabinets with shelves inside. Follow along on the process this week and let's see what I can do to turn this around and make it into something special again. Time to take a really good look at this piece, top to bottom. Take all the drawers out, take all the doors off, and start really addressing the damage that I know is there and that I might come across in the process of taking this piece apart. If there's one thing that I think most refinishers can agree on, flathead screws are absolutely horrible to work with, especially if they're vintage, especially if they've been screwed in for a long time, if they've had the original finish sprayed over them. They are just so difficult to work with. Very quickly after removing these hinges, I did decide I was just going to buy new hinges and replace it altogether and address that at the end. For now, I do want to address that large crack in one of the doors where the glue was giving way from the veneer. I made sure to apply plenty of wood glue, and I'm going to clamp a board down to help me apply even pressure across that board. I ran to the store while that glue was drying, picked up some appropriately sized hinges. Now, I did have a sneaking suspicion that the new screws were going to be smaller than the original screws that were used in this hinge. So what I'm going to do here is essentially fill those old holes with wooden dowels. In this case, wooden toothpicks. I could have either drilled out a bigger hole and used the size dowel that I have currently, or I've done this in the past. If you have something that is smaller and wooden, like a toothpick, you can fill that void with plenty of wood glue and make sure you get a nice tight fit. And this really ensures that your new screw, when screwed in the same area, will hold very, very well. Once everything was all dry and cured, I could go ahead and remove my clamps, remove that board that I used to hold everything in place. And I can use a flush saw to saw off any of those little bits of wood that are still sticking up. I will take my sander to it and smooth it out later, but I just wanted to remove whatever excess material I could. This piece needs a thorough cleaning. This stain is really, really, really deep and very pigmented, and I did find that while I was cleaning, especially the interior of these cabinets, it was coming off on my rag. So I don't know if it was sealed properly. I don't even know if it was the original manufacturer stain or if somebody applied stain to the inside of a raw cabinet after the fact. All I knew was that it needed a really good cleaning along with the rest of the piece. This is the very first drawer front that I started sanding down, and you can see there's a lot of marring in the veneer that's over the top of this. This was not from me. This was not from my sander. This is a previous bit of damage that was done. So there's a little bit on the edge too. Again, that wasn't from me. That was from a previous sanding or something like that. I'm starting to wonder if this piece was refinished in the past, or if that's the reason why it has such a deep, dark cherry stain. It's just really, really purple, and it's covering the entire piece. It's very, very thick. So perhaps they chose to stain it that color because this veneer was so damaged in the first place. I don't really know. But seeing this, I'm thinking I'm going to pivot on my design ideas. Something like this is going to be very difficult to camouflage in a wood grain pattern. I might have to paint these. This is just so far gone. It's going to look messy if I try to color correct this in any sort of way because it is such a large area, and it is going over a section of the wood grain that has a lot of variation to it, which is really pretty, but I just don't think it's gonna work. The second thing that I'm noticing is there's a lot of striping in this actual wood veneer. And if I sand down any further to try to remove that striping, I'm gonna blow through the veneer. And I think that it was from the original sanding. Now that I know it's so thin here, I think when they were trying to get this smoothed out, I think this striping is not gonna go away. So just like every project, if I run into an issue, I am gonna pivot, have to remain flexible, kind of move on. Luckily, this piece wasn't claimed, so I don't have to break the bad news to a client or anything like that. I'm just gonna continue on and probably sand down the rest of the drawer fronts just so that they have the same texture when I do go ahead and paint them. I will sand the doors and everything else and start to assess what parts need to be painted. I've decided I would really like to keep these trim pieces wood. They are a solid wood, so I don't have to worry about veneer mars on these. I did try a couple different methods of getting this finish off. I tried an acetone, I tried a denatured alcohol to see what kind of finish this has on it. And they worked a little bit, but not well enough at removing this really deep red stain. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pivot and just use that heavy duty stripper that I use so often. And I am gonna apply it on both of the door faces, even though I am gonna leave the main flat areas as a painted finish. I want to make sure that it's all an even tone underneath the paint so that it lays down nice and flat. After removing all that old stripping residue, I am going to go in with a 120 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander, and you can see how much of that residual red stain was left behind even after stripping and using my afterwash on it. This stain was something else. It just made a huge mess and was really hard to remove. But with some patience and slowly chipping away at it, I was able to get it all up. You can really see how pretty that wood grain is underneath that stain. This is a little trick that I use pretty often. I will take a pencil and I will lightly draw across the entire surface that I'm sanding, and then switch out to my higher grit sandpaper, my 220, and these pencil marks help you to know what areas you've already sanded over, as well as to let you know if you've gone far enough with your sanding in order to achieve the best result. I always try to make my life as easy as possible. In this situation, I knew I was going to have to use some of that elbow grease to really try to remove the stain on the front of this piece. So I opted to tip it over on its back. That way I'm not trying to fight gravity while using my sander, and I can really concentrate and get in all those little angled areas and nooks and crannies to really remove everything that I want removed. There are a couple areas on the base of this buffet that have some damage to them, and I just want to fill them in with a really heavy-duty hard filler just to ensure that they have the durability and stability that they need to continue holding this piece up. You can see right here there's a chunk of wood that just broke off at some point. I have clamped a support board with some masking tape on it, and I will use that to help me fill in this void area with some Bondo and let it cure nice and rock hard, and then I'll sand it into the proper shape that it needs to be. Now that I have all the wood accents stripped down that I want to leave wood grain, I am going to go in with a stain. I have a special walnut oil-based stain, and I'm going to apply it to all the trim areas, the top of the piece, as well as the base, the bottom. Those are the areas that I sanded and stripped down and am planning to leave wood grain. I wanted to go with a nice medium-toned brown stain, and special walnut's one of my go-tos. I really like this stain color. Since this is an oil-based stain, I will have to give it at the very least 24 hours to cure, if not longer, before I go ahead and top coat it and continue working on the other piece. So once I stain this, I'm done for the day. Unfortunately, that is one of the downsides of working with oil-based stains, but they're pretty easy to work with and just give a really nice, rich color to the wood. With that stain fully dry, I'm going to go ahead and seal it up. That way I can wrap it and tape it up and protect that stained surface in order to paint the rest of the body of this buffet. I am using a satin top coat. I really like satin products because it makes it wipeable and gives it a really nice luster and sheen. I'm trying to avoid having a whole lot of overspray of this top coat on the rest of the body of this buffet because I already scuff sanded it and I don't want to have to scuff sand it again. Between my coats of product, I am going to use a very, very fine grit sandpaper on a foam pad, and I will go ahead and wipe everything down and go ahead and spray the rest of my top coat. I did want to go ahead and address that chipped piece of veneer that I did have to fill previously. I have a color corrector paint that I like to use for this, and I will go in with multiple coats to add depth and dimension and seal everything off with that final third coat. This pre-taped plastic is a fantastic product to help to tape off large areas like the tops of pieces. However, it can be a little finicky because the plastic tends to stick to the tape, so you have to go slowly and carefully. I really want to make sure that I'm very careful when taping this piece off. Nothing is worse than having your tape or plastic fail and getting paint on the surface that you just worked so hard to stain and finish. These trim sections on these door faces were a little bit of a challenge. I was having a really hard time getting my tape to stick to that tiny, tiny little lip that was raised on the door faces. But with a little bit of time and patience, I was able to get it to stick down and cover that surface properly. I do suggest anytime you're trying to tape off an area, use a wet rag and go over with firm pressure the area that you're trying to tape and prevent paint from seeping through. I am going to seal off these taped areas with a clear shellac. This will help to aid that tape and make sure nothing leaks under. For the rest of the piece, I am going to use a tinted shellac. This one is tinted white and will really help with that bleed through because I know that this piece will bleed if I do not prime it. These red stains really tend to bleed through almost anything except shellac from my experience. Once that shellac is fully dry, I am going to go in with my favorite paint line, Command by Benjamin Moore, in this color Baby Fawn. It's a really pretty warm off-white, and I think it's going to complement that warmed up wood tone really nicely. It's a neutral that pairs really nicely with other decor styles and colors that might be in somebody's room wherever they're going to put this piece of furniture. My favorite way of applying this paint is spraying it. I do not suggest rolling it or brushing it. It can be done, but it dries so quickly that it doesn't really have enough time to self-level. But when you spray it, it has a flawless finish, in my experience. I do like to water this paint down just a little bit, just to let it run through my sprayer as seamlessly as possible. in between those coats, I'm gonna sand it very lightly, make sure there's no rough patches, no dust that might have landed in the paint, and I will go ahead and spray my final coats. Again, using the same technique in the same sprayer. Now that I have everything all pulled together with the color and everything, I really dislike the color of the inside of these drawer boxes. Whatever stain that they used wraps not only on the outside of the drawers, but goes onto the inside as well. It's very purple toned, and it's just not a very flattering color in general. I was really hoping that it would either sand off really easily, and after stripping and sanding the rest of the piece, I know that this finish is really resilient. Does not come off easily with acetone or other sorts of strippers. It's really gonna cling to the pores and be really difficult to get out. These drawer boxes are made with oak, which has a very strong grain pattern, and it does also settle into that grain pattern. So it's also not gonna be very easy to sand. I really don't like doing this on many pieces at all, but I think I'm actually going to give the inside of these boxes a very thorough cleaning, and I think I'm going to paint the inside of the box. I typically like to leave that the original stain color, but in this case, I really don't like the original stain color, so I'm going to paint it. I'm not going to paint any of the components that glide or slide or rub. I'm just going to do the interior of the box and the sides that show. I'm not going to do the back, I'm not going to do the bottom, I'm not going to do the track. While those drawer boxes were curing, I went inside and boiled the original hardware. These are brass. They did not look like they were brass from the get-go, but you can tell if something's not magnetic, it's most likely brass. And they were just so tarnished from use and time. Once you boil it with water and vinegar for about 15-20 minutes and then use a little bit of elbow grease with steel wool and Barkeeper's Friend, that tarnish comes right up. They're really shiny, really pretty, a nice bright brass color. Now, in order to keep that color, you do have to re-lacquer it. Otherwise, it will just tarnish again over time. So I do just take a satin lacquer and a spray, and I make sure to do several light coats in multiple directions on the hardware so that it's nice and durable. The last step, and kind of a fun little surprise pop-up pattern, is to line the drawers. I knew I wanted to line the drawers to bring in a little pop of color and to finish it out. And with the original hardware installed and that last drawer going back into its place, let's take a look back at what this piece looked like when I started. It was a really interesting piece. It did have some flaws. I wasn't in love with that really warm cherry color. There was a lot of damage to the base of this piece. It was very scuffed. Definitely needed to be refinished. There was that large stain on the top that I knew was just surface level, but it was still there. Let's take a look at what it is now. It's so refreshing and bright. That warm wood tone really complements that warm off-white color, those nice original brass pulls. Those pulls were one of my favorite parts of this dresser. They're chunky and interesting. You don't find anything like them these days on the shelf. That beautiful wood grain pattern across the bottom, across the top, it really draws your eye in and gives it something really interesting and special to look at. I'm so glad that I was able to save that top. It had the most charming frame detail all around the edges. I think this is going to be a really special piece for somebody. I hope you agree and you like it. Please feel free to comment down below what you think and like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.